All right, welcome to another episode of Five and Six. I'm your host, Dr. Simil Bay, and we always encourage you to like, share, subscribe to this channel. What we want to do with this series is speak to those who interpret and utilize ancient and current technologies, and that is tech in regards to their creative potential and how they implement that into their lives and work for the benefit of humanity. At times, we'll bring up topics that provide a cross dimensional relationship to our main themes. And again, I'm Dr. Simil Bay, a medical mathematician, health practitioner, ethnobotanist, author, father, and innovator. My role here is to bring the most fascinating and remarkable humans in their field to share content that will help you navigate your changing world. Wonderful. Let's get started. So, my guest today is Adam Butler, co founder of the Butler Bros, based in Austin, Texas, a collaborative brand and development company that I've really known of for some time. Uh, Adam and his brother Marty are at the center of wisdom and a human based approach to branding and storytelling that is indeed bar none. So, Adam, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Simil. Thank you for having me. I'm doing good.
Wonderful. So good to be seeing you here. Well, for those who may not have the inside scoop, those who want to get to know Adam Butler, tell us a little bit about your origin story, Adam, if you would.
Sure. Well, these days in a fast-growing town like Austin, telling people that you're from Austin tends to get people's attention. So I can start there. I have to be honest, I wasn't born in Austin. I was actually born in Orlando, Florida. My parents had found Austin in 1969. I was born in Florida in 1973. My parents were pursuing an opportunity that didn't work out, so they moved right back to Austin. They were from the Northeast, and so I came back to Austin when I was 6 months old. I'm the oldest of five kids, and all four of my siblings were born right here in Austin, and I grew up in Austin. I went to university in Austin, started my career in Austin. So I have a real strong relationship with the city, and it has undoubtedly shaped the way I see the world. My parents were looking for a new way of life. My mom grew up on a farm in upstate New York. My dad grew up on Long Island in a family that had worked in the financial services industry. He and his brothers primarily decided that way of life wasn't for them. And after my great grandfather died at age 65 and my grandfather died at age 65, my dad and his brothers in particular decided, man, we got to do we got to live a different way. And so I think that shedding of that kind of model of success was a big part of how they ended up in Austin. They liked the city. They liked the kind of attitude of the place. They weren't hippies, but they were liberal in their thinking. My dad was a very strong born again Christian. He had grown up kindergarten through 12th grade in the Catholic Church, and then he went to a Catholic university. He really struggled with his Catholicism. So faith struggle was a part of my upbringing. Hearing about it, wrestling with it, not a loss of faith, but not a faith that was undiscussed. So that was huge in my psyche. My parents also had 5 kids in 7 years. And my dad ended up running a small painting company to survive. So money was also a constant conversation. We never had enough. We never lived in poverty. But it was a stress point, right? Like we had what we needed. We always had a roof. We always had food. We had lots of laughs, but there was no college fund.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. And that was a stress for my mom and my dad. And that was a rift with them. And that was painful to see for me. So like the struggles around money, religion, these things carried forth in me for sure. And as the oldest, I think, I had some unspoken expectation. I also, to help integrate those things.
Yeah.
And I felt it. I had to really work through that and realize those things weren't my responsibility per se in the family. I had to come to those things for myself. So that's a crazy survey of, but I think those are some fundamental things. And I bring those up because those are thematic for me in the way I relate to the world and the things I still wrestle with as an adult. And as a person who's raising 3 boys with my wife, Julie, and wanting to make sure that I don't perpetuate any pain or trauma or confusion around those areas.
Well, Adam, tell me a little bit about, in that upbringing, you talk about thematics, religion, of course, the grind, the stressors. Was there a moment in time during this origin where storytelling became an outlet?
Wow, that's a great question. It's funny, the first time, I had people telling me I was a good writer when I was in high school. My mom once told me, "You're going to be a copywriter one day." And I said, "Is that a person who works on trademarks at a law firm?" Like, I didn't even know what that was. So that was cool that I was told that I had that ability and that gift to tell stories. Our family was a big storytelling family, right? Like 5 kids, dinner table, everybody's trying to get some spotlight. Our house was loud and fun. So I think storytelling was a part of that. My dad was a huge storyteller. Everything was allegory, everything. We would joke, and God rest my father's soul, but he would say, like, you'd tell him a story about something that happened during the day, and he'd say, the Apostle Paul, he would. So we would always joke, like, he always had a story. He always had a way of situating your current experience in something more eternal. And so knowing that there was always a story as a way for sense making to occur was definitely, I got that, right? And what I do now has everything to do with that. Like I'm helping brands communicate their story with sensitivity towards their audience and fidelity to what they can actually say that's true. That's the integrity of my job. But to your specific question, the first time I was asked to write an autobiography was a moment that I really remembered in college, and I think story as writing the story and realizing what you've included or edited out, the power of curating your own myth. But then also realizing, like, hey man, this stuff is my stuff, for better or for worse. And then there's some persistent plot points as well, which we can probably get into because you're good at that, Simmel.
Well, no, I'm learning so much. When you talk about this, so we're talking about timelines in this origin story, that autobiography, and what age would you have been then?
I think I did one of those in high school, actually, but I remember the one I did in college. The professor's name was Mary Steinhardt, and she was great. I think she had us read. She was a kinesiology professor, at the University of Texas, but she had us read Man's Search for Meaning
Huh.
by Viktor Frankl,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
who invented logotherapy. And and kind of using that as the power of his idea,
Hmm.
of his ideas in general, then that was sort of a prompt to write an autobiography. And I found it, and it's interesting how you relate to your own story changes over time, obviously.
Mhm.
And I wrote that towards the end of my adolescence, you know? And so I was probably trying to write my way out, as Lin-Manuel Miranda would say, like trying to write my way towards something that I wanted for myself. And if I went back and read it, I'd probably see that. But
Hmm.
yeah, so it would be interesting to do it now.
Yeah, how those iterate over time with experience.
Yeah, and I'm lucky because I have 4 siblings, so I have like these co-writers of my own story because I hear them interpret
Uh-huh.
the events, the big events of our lives from the past and even the present.
Yeah.
Because they all happen to live in Austin at this time. And just the other night, I was talking to my sister Lauren about when my father passed, and she said, "I wonder if we all were thinking the same thing," you
Mhm.
know. And I thought that was an interesting question, right? Like we all had our own story churning,
Of course.
and so yeah, it's cool to respect the fact that we experience the same thing differently as individuals, even as close as siblings, and in moments that are as intense as a passing.
Mhm.
We all have our own narratives.
Our own narratives, our own, uh, wow, internal branding for some of us, external branding influences. Um, and so from that into the adolescent trip down memory lane or self-reflection,
Yeah,
right? Kudos to those professors. I've had professors like that. They're amazing.
yeah,
Just one word, one statement that really alters the course of your life in a way.
yeah,
Um, you know, Going past the end of that adolescence here, still in Austin, very different place at that time. We're talking, what year are we talking?
I graduated UT in '96.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it was a, it was still a more affordable place to live. That's for sure. I wasn't intimidated, right? Like
Yeah.
about. I mean, I can tell you what I made. My first paycheck was 18,500 a year,
Hmm.
and my loans were in forbearance, but I was paying my rent. So there's no way in hell you could do that now in Austin.
Nope.
I mean, it was not comfortable, but it was possible, and that's
Mhm.
changed, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, I had been interning at GST&M Advertising. That place has an incredible story of its own. It's now 50 years old, founded by 5 graduates of University of Texas in 1971,
Hmm.
which was a very intrepid thing to do, to try to start a national advertising agency.
Hmm.
So that agency grew up with Austin, and I was able to get in there and start interning, mailroom, then file room, then traffic manager, then copywriter. And that place provided a ton of opportunity and community for me as well, a professional community.
Hmm.
I didn't have a model for that. My parents weren't corporate people. My dad ran a painting business. My mom was a stay-at-home mom who did jobs when she had time, which was not often. Um, and they were ambitious and intelligent people who encouraged us to do whatever we thought we could do. But the truth is that I needed to be in an environment where I could see it and then try to be it, and that's
Yep.
what happened. I did see it. I was like, whoa. One little anecdote I have is I walked into a guy's office Terrence Reynolds was his name. He was an art director. I don't know where he is now, but he had the Michael Jordan Wings poster in his office. This was a 30-year-old man.
Mhm.
I, at the time of my internship, was 18 or 19 years old. I was like, man, I had that same poster in my room when I was 12. And I was like, that was one of those little moments where, like, wow, man, you can be forever young.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And you are where you need to be, type of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was one of those little, it was just a little window, right?
Yeah.
And it made me feel, it just made me feel excited that, like, you didn't have to shed your youthful passions and interests
Mhm.
as you approached a career, which, again, that's the message it sent to me. It was an inkling, that's all. But yeah, so I really leaned into that, and it was a homegrown company, and the founders were still there. The culture was pretty vibrant, and so that really, I don't know if this is answering the question you even asked, but that's what pulled me in.
Mhm. Sure. Yeah. And when we talk about or think of advertising, we've known during the post-World War, uh, definitely America, it took a shift.
Mm,
Mad Men, we've all seen that series, or some of us, and how that world began to shape, post World War II, but also within shaping the minds of women and marketing and buying things and so
mm,
on, household goods. But then there begins to be, of course, in the inner cities, and these failed policies of Nixon and Moynihan and all these folks with this war on drugs, right? Uh,
yes.
this type of lulling. You mentioned in the branding sensitivity, integrity that you've learned from your family, from your dad, your mom. Um, did you notice any of that at GDS&M at that time, or was that always there with you, or did you notice the opposite? And we don't want to throw anyone under the.
No, no, I think it's fair because you have crisis of conviction in your jobs,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
you get a look behind the curtain sometimes, um, at stuff that challenges your integrity, right? Like,
yeah.
I remember, I can speak to a lot of points here, but I remember when I was asked to work on the US Air Force, and that was a real interesting moment. Like, I'm essentially a part of a recruiting apparatus for the US military. How do I feel about that?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so at the time, I did wrestle with it, and ultimately, when I saw the jobs they were recruiting for, I liked the jobs they were recruiting for, but you don't have a lot of say.
Right,
um,
right.
I think specifically, I mean, GSD&M, one of the cool things they did was they were one of the pioneers of what's called purpose-based branding.
Purpose-based branding. Okay.
So, you know, Sam Walton was, it's crazy to think, but when it was Sam's Club,
Hmm.
before Walmart, and as Walmart rose, Walmart's story is obviously massive in American industry and culture, but GSD&M worked, the founders of that agency worked directly with Sam. They knew Sam. They also worked directly with Herb Kelleher. They knew Herb Kelleher. These are people who changed the game, and they had big ideas. They believed in culture. Um, so one of the notes I really took from watching that was, who the clients you work for, you have to make them more successful, but what you learn from them is a trade that has more than monetary value. Because
Hmm.
if you're learning about culture from Herb Kelleher,
Hmm.
and how to do supply chain from Sam Walt, I mean, you're getting a PhD, and that's one of the secrets of our industry, is that you learn from your clients, and that's one of the reasons why branding, advertising, marketing is a career that's compelling, is that you're constantly learning. You're always on your back foot. And unless you're really comfortable asking questions and trying to learn constantly, you're not going to last very long, because the discomfort of not knowing ever present. And you have to admit it, lean into it. But as it pertains to truth, I definitely that was a big part of Marty and I starting our own firm, was wanting to work with founders and wanting to work for brands that we personally believed in. I just surveyed our team last week, and I asked why they wanted to work at the Butler Bros. And the theme of working on brands that do good is huge. And it's not like my staff is all millennials either. This is about people who just want to apply their talents in a way that matters.
Mhm.
And so I get that, we've worked with a lot of cause organizations, a lot of nonprofit organizations, but you don't have to be a cause-based organization or a nonprofit organization to have a positive motive in your work. You really don't. But you get into examining capitalism, you get into examining what's really fair and how you treat your employees and your customers. I mean, that stuff's always on the menu for discussion. And so I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by leaders who have really powerful visions that we can help amplify. That's what we're looking for. And, but we're also consumers. So like we don't always discern properly either. I mean, I have a lot of power as a gatekeeper in my own business about who we work with, right? And I'm looking at a bunch of metrics, and I'm considering a lot of things, like how much time will we be engaged? Will the revenue that we generate lead to profit, or will we break even, or will we be upside down and working on something, right? And weighing all those things and pursuing things that feel like we're building a better society, a more just society, not profiting off of regressive ideas. I mean, this is the soul stuff, and it's fascinating, man. I mean, it's never ending.
Never ending. And, getting it more so into the more revelatory parts of human existence, right? You mentioned, we talked about the sensitivity and branding, right? The exchange of the unknown, but having a placeholder there that guides you to where and whom you want to work with. That doesn't sound much like advertising as we've known it in the past. And so that type of revelation, you say good for the soul. I have to ask you this too. How did the Austin FC job come about? And what's that exchange like?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because that started, I mean, there's a lot of little ways it started, but the intention that they brought to the table, other than being the first major league sports team in the history of one of the largest cities in America, which was obviously a huge business opportunity.
Yeah.
And they had all the data in the world to prove it, from the league and from the Boston Consulting Group, and you name it. The fundamentals were there for success, but the ownership group's mindset was, they called it Project BAT when I signed the first NDA.
Okay.
And I came to find out later that BAT wasn't just, a cheeky reference to our Mexican free-tailed bats, but also an acronym, Be Austin's Team. And they really, so from a business perspective, yes, it makes a ton of sense to not disenfranchise any potential fan, right? Like,
of course.
But executing on that vision is another matter. And the truth is, we built the brand with that intention of inclusion and being a place where all of Austin could come together. And it affected the way we framed the brand. the
Mm.
imagery we chose, the story we told, and even the way we launched it. And the team has doubled down on those themes. And if you look in the supporters section, it is one of the most diverse points, in my opinion, of celebration that I can see visually in Austin.
Mm.
And the thing is, all they did was provide the platform, which is not a cheap or easy platform to provide, by the way,
Right.
but the literal platform of the supporter section, that is a canvas upon which the community is leaving their own mark. That's cool. To me, that's the coolest part of it. It's cool that we built the brand. And when I go in there, I can see that and feel it. But what makes it alive are the people and their behavior. It's alive now. It's a living thing. And so,
Much so.
the team's not winning a lot of games and people are pissed. And
They'll get there.
yeah, but like it's interesting to see the supporters, the values that they bring to that conversation now. Like, there are people who are saying things like, this is our team, we'll stand by them, it'll be even sweeter when they start to win.
Mhm.
Which is, of course, that's true, right? But it's just interesting. That's the culture of the team.
Mm.
And the club itself does not. They can attempt to manipulate the culture. They can attempt to, stimulate the culture, but the culture is the culture. It is going to do what it wants. And I'm proud of Austin in the way it is wrestling through fandom. And I don't know, because I self-identify with the city. So I like to see the generosity, the diversity, the celebration, the breaking down of walls. Like, it's cool, man. And the team's making a buttload of money.
Yeah, they are.
but,
They are.
but we're not making money anymore. We did our work. So
Right.
that is what it is. But I feel like, as a part of our own legacy, I'm proud of it.
Yeah, and you talk about the exchange that
Yeah.
you just, I mean, to see you glow.
Yeah, I'm going to the game tonight. I'll yell for the team. I'm not yelling for the brand we made. I'm not yelling for,
Right.
I'm in it, and that's fun. It's fun to surrender to that and just be a part of a communal event.
Mm.
A lot of people say, sports is the new church, well, it might be. But yeah, it's cool to watch the way that's all going down.
Well, so, in that expanded storytelling and branding, revelatory wise, tell me a little bit about these think wrong practices.
Yeah.
When I first read that, human centered research, radical collaborations, but think wrong practices, what first came to my mind as far as advertising. So I think of the Redskins, which total, racist trope, but
Yep.
that's where they were at that time, right?
Right.
Advertising. I don't even know when that was started. What, in the 50s maybe, or when was that created? Definitely post World War II, maybe.
Yeah.
And then you look at, say, FC, right? Inclusive,
A treat.
honoring the culture.
Yeah.
And its power and what that says. But if you could explain a little bit about the think wrong practices.
Yeah. So, the intention that led to the discovery of Think Wrong was, we wanted to find a better way to collaborate with our clients. And, that's a buzzword, and, there's tons of buzzwords, but the intention was, we needed a system, we needed a way to break down the personas that arrive in the room when you're making stuff with clients. And I saw this at GSTM, like, I remember once coming back from a massive slam dunk campaign creation to launch a brand that shall not be named, right?
Yes.
But on the flight home, there was complaining about the client. There was complaining about this and that, like all this Monday morning quarterback stuff. was like, this sucks. This is my life. Not advertising's not my life,
Mhm.
but this is my life. Like, I don't want my life to be characterized by backbiting and by complaining.
Mhm.
I want my life to be characterized by being honest in the moment and, having cognition with people and moving the ball forward. And that, you don't always win anyway, but if the experience of doing the work is miserable, then you have a miserable life. So
Yep.
so it was driven by, like, hey, we need new strategic tools, and we don't want our clients to be our adversaries. What a terrible way to approach your work.
Right.
And so about a decade ago, I met a guy named Greg Galley who was working on these think wrong practices. They had created a design school called Project M, where they were evolving design thinking practices to teach students a new problem solving set. They would put them in a community. This is how the school worked. You'd go to a community and you'd problem find with the community. Just get on the ground and see what's going on. Then collaborate with the community and create solutions to problems that you found. Co-create with people. So that was the framework. Then they said, this is the most fun thing we've ever done in our career at this design school. How do we make this professional? So they wrote the book, Think Wrong. Think Wrong is based on the concept of defeating our own biology, which says if we have identified a problem, that we know what it looks like when we already know how to solve it, right? That's a myelinated pathway in our brain. Like, we're just going to go from A to B. We're going to solve it that way. I've seen that problem. I know how to solve that. And then in culture, the same thing happens. A bunch of brains are doing the same thing. We are living on biases, assumptions, orthodoxies. We are perpetuating, whether it be racism or the same way we've done energy policy. Like, we get in these entrenched loops. Part of it's defeating our own biology. So Think Wrong is a system that helps you defeat biology and culture to bust the status quo and come up with new ideas. And a lot of what it's about is creating space for foolishness, for laughter, for spiraling up and yes-anding instead of saying no but, because that's what happens to fragile little innovative ideas when they get put into big old machines that don't like innovation. They get smashed before they can even let out their first cry. And so we used Think Wrong with clients on the front end of the process. We would do a Think Wrong Blitz. We did it with every client that's on our website. And it does a few things for us. It stretches out what the client thinks is possible in their evolution of their brand. It creates a bonding between their team and our team. Now we're people because of a lot of what we do in the Blitz. You're seeing human dimensions. You're not just seeing jobs and roles. Like, I don't introduce myself as the CEO of the Butler Brothers. I introduce myself as Adam. And I tell people that my secret hidden talent is cutting my own hair. And I ask you what yours is. And that's how we go around the room, right? So we democratize the space, and then we begin doing the work. We convene around a challenge statement. We run drills, and those drills help us imagine what's possible, have aspirations, create prototypes of ideas, and they set the tone. So that's why we've used it. And it's cool because it's pretty open source. Once you understand the framework and the practices, you can start inventing stuff. And our team does that. So it's really critical. It's baked into our business now. And one tangible example that listeners could use, which is a drill that we use in almost every meeting, is called Like, Wish, Wonder. And when we present work, we say, what did you like? What did you wish you saw? And what are you wondering about? And what that does is orient people towards the positive, not tell us what you didn't like.
Right.
because that doesn't create information that we can evolve the work with.
It's not useful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really useful, but it's a standard default because when you're in a time box and there's money being exchanged and there's reputation and success on the line, people are operating out of a place of scarcity and fear.
They are.
And
Yeah.
we're attacking that every day. And we're saying we're good enough together. We're going to make progress. We're going to break through. You just have to keep believing it. And we have to believe it too. Trust me. Like, that's what we're drinking for breakfast.
That's right.
And so we're just trying to create a space where that way of being can perpetuate. And that's a journey, right? Because every new person we add to our team, every new client interaction, we're basically creating an ad hoc culture between us and our clients every time. And we're going to be committed and forceful to this way of working and being, because that's what we know works. But we run it. It's a culture war sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you talk about, cancel culture was in the limelight, still is, but, was more so in the last, few years of, I think it is essence trying to hold those accountable who seem to get away with everything.
Yes.
So I understand its origins of just, nonsense that's deemed acceptable,
Right.
but egregious nonsense too.
Yes.
So it's like, the only way. But as with everything, mass media, mass consumption, it gets to be manipulated, and it loses its meaning, or its origin story, so to speak. The think wrong, though, appears to be a more holistic centered, human centered approach to
Yes.
that event.
Yeah, it lets you bring it. You do put faith in human intuition. You're not, and you put value on the ideas of the individual, even in the era of big data, right? Like we do integrate data into our thinking, but people represent data. We're not sitting in a room full of robots yet. And data can be manipulated. So,
Yep.
What is the truth? What's objective? Our work is seen as wildly subjective, right? But if you have objective intentions and you have objective measures, well, then you can see if it worked. And with respect for the people that you're communicating to, and like we talked about earlier, with fidelity to what is actually being delivered, making all of that interesting is our job. But we can't invent the product. Herb Kelleher used to tell GSD&M, I make the cake, you make the frosting. Which is so true. You have to humble yourself. You're part of a huge team. We get to make something magic, but like all the ingredients of that trick and all we didn't make them. We conduct them, and we want people to have agency and authorship in that process, because we're doing it for them. It's their brand. It will persist beyond most of the people who are working on it as well. It has its own story arc. And I also have gotten to that place where I realize a great way to subjugate your ego is to say, we're all serving this thing together right now. We will not serve it forever, and neither will you. I don't have to say that out loud. I mostly say that in my own head. And that lets me come back to the mat and try to do the right thing and walk away from the mat and be like, we left our sweat on there, the bill was paid, and we move on, and hopefully those are the things that build our reputation. And what people say about the way all that went down, the fruit that the work bears, that's not our story to tell. Now it's in other people's hands.
Mhm.
And that's hard to quantify, right? Like when
It is.
you're running a business, you're like, I mean, you can go study your reputation. Big brands do it. We've done it for big brands, but we don't go out and measure our own reputational score. And when the phone keeps ringing, that's a good sign that you're on the right track.
That's a
But
pretty good sign. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, word of mouth referral, for smaller
yeah.
businesses. Yeah. That whole nine. Yeah.
But
Wow.
yeah,
Huh.
I feel like you had another question in there. So
Well, I mean, I just this is amazing. I love this because you know people are the data, and I say this sometimes in the practice of I when we look at blood work, right? We
yeah,
say there's a story there,
yeah,
like the white blood cells, the red blood cells, the lymphocytes, the eosinophils, you know, like they have a name for a
yeah,
reason because they perform a certain function. Could it be that there's a personality of health and disease as well? And so getting to know that exchange and ascribing particular, friends or foes, if you would, of herbs in my case, or
yeah,
medicines towards, regulating, this these extremes that may be in the blood work, um, allows for that story to be met, to be heard,
yeah.
to be observed, listened to. And so I think this is why we do this show because this is why.
Yeah, finding
Uh,
the connection point. I do love the idea, and I don't understand how you do what you do,
yeah,
but I do I relate to the notion of there being a story in your blood, and very much so. I've seen that with my own father-in-law, who's really worked through heart disease, and he's changed his diet, and he's a plant-based eater. And I was just talking to Rip Esselstyn yesterday, who wrote the book The Engine 2 Diet, and
too. Yeah.
I took part in his pilot study, and I saw the story of my blood, and I saw how that story changed when I changed my inputs. And it's cool to get into that narrative, right? And realize that you can write on it.
And as you mentioned, though, curating your own myth, though, that's a different thing.
Well, some people are pretty shameless about it.
They're
That's one thing.
shameless. They're shameless. I
They're
tell
shameless, man. I know, man. It's funny
you.
because I mean, one of the things of my dad was one of the things I really took from him was that you know, we wrote on the back at his funeral, on the back of the program, it said, "I'd rather be a bit player
Mm.
in God's play than a star on the stage of life."
Hmm.
Right? Like, in that pursuit of fame, um, there's from many traditions, there's many stories that will not lead you to a happy place, right?
Right.
And I think our culture tells you that unless you're famous, unless you've done something to be successful, that you're not worthy. And what a destructive
It's harmful.
story that is for anybody. Um, and if that's what we're trying to attain, we're kind of doomed. So I don't know. I definitely, when I said that earlier, I like, even in telling my own story, I don't want to make stuff up.
Sure. Yeah.
Marty and I, years ago, we worked with a musician named James Hand. Charlie Crockett actually just put an album out about James Hand as
Okay.
being one of his mentors. But we were working with James Hand the other day. This was probably 18 years ago. And he was wearing a t-shirt in a recording session. We were making a radio commercial. And I said, "Hey, James, that's a pretty sharp shirt." His own picture was on the back, and he said he was a hardcore old country boy, and he's like, "This isn't a cool shirt. This is marketing, and marketing is embarrassing. All marketing is embarrassing." And it was like, I will never forget that, because I mean, I'm not saying I don't wear my own logo, because I do, but it was from such a place of integrity that he said that. He was humiliated to have to promote himself. And I think there's a healthy relationship to that. And he was probably on the other end of the spectrum. There's some self-loathing there maybe, but I did take it to heart. I was like, he's an older person and he has a different and down the road perspective from me. And damn, that's memorable. All marketing is embarrassing. And we live in an era where, you know, marketing doesn't have to be as overt. It can be much more subversive.
Yeah.
Or you can just go right to the people that you're trying to communicate with in a way that matters most. And you don't have to broadcast as much. So that game has changed as well, but it just, I don't know why I told that story. It just stuck with me.
Well, I think that's amazing when you talk of now to get away with tone deafness is like a mortal sin in your industry.
Right.
And you know, things have shifted. They shift so fast, but and it was always there, right? I think you talk about the culture, the cultural awareness, but there's also, you know, people are working things out. There's a lot of, we talked about the Story Solution, great book I love by Eric Edson for screenwriters and so on, which talks about, you know, if you can get these four in any story that you write, Hollywood will call you a master, right? Hollywood's Hollywood, and you know, but I would say it is trauma. Everyone's got some trauma somewhere.
Yes.
And as that narrative, as that heroine or hero of that story, they shield it, and then they seek to express it either consciously or unconsciously, normally by the midpoint, beginning of Act Two. And then they battle it by the midpoint of Act Two. And then they try to overcome it by the end of Act Two. Going into Act Three, they're committed now to think wrong practices, you know. And so, you know, as I see what the Butler Bros are doing, as their foundation, as their touchstones to their foundation, cornerstones in the industry, what else would you say, as a matter of fact, just to, you know, elaborate on some of these, is needed in the industry that you're in going forward, the innovative side?
Yeah, it's funny. Just this morning, I was actually thinking about. Today we're going to Blitz ourselves, my staff, my studio. I was working all day yesterday, and I can't wait to do this. We're doing a Think Wrong Blitz on ourselves, which we try to do once a year. And one of the things, we did a survey ahead of it, and one of the things that emerged in the tea leaves of it all that I can see is that when our clients are happiest with us is when they feel that we have created that ad hoc culture, and that when we're working together with them, they feel like they're in a different space, right? Than the culture that they normally work in, right? But that's only a choice. That's not, we didn't create an alternative reality. I mean, maybe we have, but they like it in that space most of the time when it's going well. Of course, it's an art, not a science, right?
Sure.
And our team feels the same way. The things that they like coming from other agencies and in some cases other industries, that's what they're reflecting back to, is this cultural space that's created for creativity. So what I think is next is scaling that somehow, which, you know, my mentor, Greg Galley at Think Wrong, I mean, they're very much in a teaching posture. They're in a teach a man to fish worldview. We will train you how to think wrong. So that you can infect your own culture. And they've worked with massive companies all over the world. And they've also worked with some NGOs that are solving super gnarly problems in far-flung places. So the spectrum of those that they work with, it's a problem-solving system, right? And at the end of the day, that's what we do. So what's scalable? Like, are we a teaching brand? I don't think so, not yet. I mean, we certainly teach as we do the work. You know, we're modeling something for people, and some people really get into it. You know, I bought the book. We talked to a prospect this week. We explained what a Think Wrong Blitz was. This woman went out and bought the book and started highlighting it before we'd even sent her a proposal. That's probably a good sign that she's interested, right? But it's also a sign of hunger for a different way of doing things.
Right.
So I think we need to be smart for our own studio about fearlessly projecting what we hope can happen when we work together, not just the results that could come later, but the culture that we can create in solving the problems together. Sometimes for like an Austin FC, that's 6 to 9 month project to build a brand that has a very definitive beginning and end point. But sometimes we're in longer relationships with clients. It could be 2 to 10 years. And how do you keep bringing that energy of inquiry and not let it become a caricature of itself, which is the risk. It's also a cultural risk for us because our team will say, this ain't it. Like, we're not doing it. This is pantomime. And as a leader of my own business with my brother, Marty's very aware of that as well. And that's where you have to trade money for freedom again and go, we got to get free of this. This is sucking us down. So that's a conversation that happens. We get feedback from our team, but when those moments come, we have to make the right call. We have to say, adios, even if it's good money, bye-bye. Wow. Do it in a way that leaves people intact, but stay on our own path and keep spiraling up, because it is all about the energetic field of our business. That's it. Yeah. I mean, when we lose that, when I talk about this stuff, I get energized. I pay attention to that. Like, I'm not trying to be energized. I am energized. Yes. And there's a difference, and I'm getting to the age where I actually realize that now. Like, am I just fired up? Why am I fired up? What is making me fired up? What's making me fired up is the belief that when you work this way, the best of people comes out. That's exciting to me. Not just as a leader of a business, but as a human. So that's where I'm at, man. That's about as much vision as I've got.
That's a big vision. It's for sure scalable. And so, I'm going to look into it. And for my own organizations here, I think that, the Butler Bros are doing it. The Austin FC tag, that is a living testament to this vision that you have and how you're living it, this human-centered approach to life. For those who are young in this intersection of all things now, that's where we are. We say industry, but as you mentioned, some people came from other industries. And it's still this human life that we're in, right? It never really stops. What are some of the truisms?
Yes.
Guideposts that you would have for those who are seeking to walk this particular path, or any path for that matter? I know that's a big one, but that you like to leave for them?
We're working with E4 Youth right now.
Mhm. Carl,
Yeah.
yeah, great guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we actually just blitzed with them to help them tell their story to potential major donors. They have a board member named Eric Collier, who's a brilliant man. And when we blitzed with them, and I'm going to do the shout out now, I'm going to try to raise some money for E4 Youth. But one of the things we realize is through their pedagogy and through their intentions and through their knowledge, right? All of that combined, they say right now, we creative youth of color are a drastically underutilized resource, right? Like that's a headline you can get your head around, right?
Right.
But what happens in E4 Youth, it isn't just that students are being given a pathway to career. It's that this program runs on critical consciousness. It helps people see what myths they've eaten. It helps people defeat those myths. And it helps people move up on Maslow's hierarchy towards self-awareness and self-actualization. And this is Eric. You got to get Eric on your show. And then that changes the game. And Eric is such a living embodiment of that. Like I'm now half the reason we're working more with E4 Youth on things beyond working directly with students is just to hang out with Eric.
Okay.
Because he's so brilliant about breaking down, and this is human truth. Now, this is a specific group of kids in Austin, Texas that they're working with. But what he and Humberto and Janaea and Carl are doing is much more profound. The creative, and I share this because I think it is the answer to many people's existential crisis in their work and in their life, is that it's not just your value is not derived from what you do. It's not about your job. It's about your relationship to yourself. And if you don't love yourself, you're always going to be looking for external validation. And the creative field is a shitty place to do that because it can be so vapid.
Yeah.
And our culture can be so vapid. So when you orient from a place of power and knowing yourself and loving yourself and accepting yourself, which is a lot of what they're doing in that program, so that when you show up with that power. That is powerful because it's rare. When I meet people like that, I'm struck. I'm like, damn. Because you can feel the difference between someone who's projecting it and someone who's being that. It's very different. Like you're being cocky, you're kind of flossing your success. You're doing these things that make me know that you aren't really there.
Right.
And yet when you're with somebody who's kind of in this abiding place with themselves, you want to know how they got there. And I feel like, find people who can help you remodel your insides. It could be a therapist, it could be a guru, it could be a teacher. The work you do, Simmel, is on the spectrum. I have an acupuncturist that I go to named Leah, who's a friend of my sister, the first time I ever went to see her, 2 hours we talked. A needle was not dropped.
That was the needle.
That was the needle.
We were threading. That was threading.
Yeah, but being opened up and, allowing yourself to be. And E4 is a place where very deliberately create a safe space to open people up. You're making things, you're creating things. That's the program. The program creates a space where you have to confront your own biases, assumptions, orthodoxies, ideas. Those are the things that fuel your ideas. So if you can open up, creativity and creative fields are a great place. You keep invoking Hollywood. because we're having to tell a story, and it's just it's cool. So I that's a long answer with maybe not really clear takeaway bullet points, but I'm doing that work to this day. I'm practicing awareness, self-awareness. I'm practicing learning from teachers. I've been tinkering with this framework around how to not be reactive. And the framework is noticing what happens in my body, taking 3 minutes to pause, wondering what would happen if I responded in 3 hours, wondering how this is all going to feel in 3 weeks, and inquiring as to whether I'd be proud of all of those things in 3 years. And I just drew this one down on a piece of paper to get me to break the cycle of being reactive, because I get a lot of stimulus and I feel pressure to respond.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to react, really. So how do I become more responsive and less reactive? That's something I'm constantly working on. So I could leave it with that. I'm a work in progress. 2021, Adam Butler. I hope I'll be changed by 2022.
Well, Adam, I also wanted to give you just thank you for that. Really, give you your flowers, you and your brother Marty and your sister, your family.
Thank you
for this again, these nexus events that you're bringing into our formation as humans. So we thank you for what you do. Also wanted to ask if you could give your social media, your ways to connect with the Butler Bros, and so on.
Yeah, so the Butler Bros are on Instagram. We actually have our handle at the Butler Bros. We're also on Twitter at that same handle, and we're on LinkedIn as well. And we kind of keep LinkedIn's, if it's a mullet, LinkedIn's the top, and Instagram's the back. And then Twitter is, God knows what's happening on there on any given day.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we're in Austin. We're available. I would also give a shout out to Think Wrong, and you can find out more about them at Solve Next. That's actually the company that now sits on top of Think Wrong.
Okay.
And you can find them in all those same places. And they're a wonderful resource. There's some good resources on there. And our URL is thebutlerbros.com. And you can see more of our work and learn a little bit more about how we do things. It's not a deep website. It's a handshake. And
there you go.
But yeah. Yeah. Simil, it's always nice to be with you, man. You just open me up and get the conversation flowing. You're a profound listener, and I thank you for your friendship and inviting me on.
You're always welcome. We'll have to do this again, of course, in a different setting. And I'll just say to our viewers, our listeners, it's been a joy to interview and talk to you today, Adam. And thank you for being a guest on 5 and 6. Look forward to having you back. To our listeners, again, thank you for being a part of this experience. And if you'd like to learn more, participate in our courses, webinars, and projects, go to bayacupuncture.com. You can find us at similar social media handles. And we would like to remind you to please like, subscribe, and share these for our future episodes and supporters. Again, it's been a joy, Adam, and we'll talk soon.